It's great to be here again today, and I am honored. My name is Gary Fowler, and I'm the CEO, president, and co-founder of GSD Venture Studios, a premier global venture studios focusing on artificial intelligence. It is with great honor today that I introduce the one and the only Samir Sharma. And Samir, you've been at Intel for 20 years, started in a software engineer to the GM of smart cities, IoT, intelligent transportation. It's an incredible journey. I don't know today of many people that have been around a company for 20 years. So it's a journey. But with all the technology advancements that you've seen during your time, it's got to be pretty interesting. What was the journey like?
Gary, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I love the tone of the conversations on this show. It's very easygoing. It's very authentic. So you can sit back and have, conversation as humans versus, something that's a bit more polished or nuanced, right? So let's be authentic. I love it. To your question about my journey, even though 20 years may seem like a long time, the reality is Intel is one of those companies that allows you the flexibility to take on new roles, new challenges. And so that's been really good to see and take advantage of. The common theme has been my work has been mostly focused on new areas. So think about incubation to scaling in new disruptive industries. And I didn't plan my career 20 years ago. Some of this was by choice, some of it just happened. My first job at Intel was focused on taking a silicon that was designed for the PC market and helping shape it for the server market in a four-way system by adding things like memory, ECC, and other features. The next step was back in 2001-2 timeframe, we had the build out of internet happening. And suddenly our entire networks were getting software defined. And so we worked on network processors back then to see if all the complex silicon in a typical network router or a radio access network base station could be collapsed onto a single piece of silicon. And back then we didn't have words like software defined.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Gary.
No, it's just I'm enchanted. I love it. I love to hear the stories. Go ahead. I love it.
Subsequent to that, we expanded that business. Today it's about a $4 billion plus business for Intel, but it's obviously happened over many years. The next big step was when iPad came out and we had sort of a new way of interacting with devices. Intel focused on tablets as well as smartphones, including a big acquisition we made. So I was involved in that. We grew our presence in that market significantly over a matter of 3 years. Mm-hmm. And as I look back at 15 years, so this was 5 years ago, and looked at all the pieces of the puzzle I had picked up with software, hardware, business strategy background, I got really excited about Internet of Things. So started this team about 5 years ago, initially focused on new markets, new businesses, and then refocused ourselves on smart cities and intelligent transportation over time. And right now we're growing that business really rapidly. When I look at common themes, I think the interplay of hardware and software has increasingly become more important. Mm-hmm. Now, as I said earlier, I didn't design my career to pick those pieces along the way. Some of it just happened, right? Because of what I was interested in. I think the other big thing for me has been, we can talk about technology and products, but I think the concept of leadership has also changed drastically. Mm-hmm. The best analogy I can give is, I think when I started my career, a leader was seen more of as a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And today, I think a leadership expectation is more around that of a coach, where you are stepping out of the game.
I love that. That's it. I love that. That's really great, because that's what it's all about, right? Being the best coach in the world.
Gary, I'm having a little bit of issue hearing you. I hope you can hear me.
I hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I still cannot hear you. What we can do is let me re-enter the chat, and we'll do the usual reboot and reset routine and see if that helps us.
Hold on just a second. Let me try something here. Let me go in and let me look at. Um, hello. Can you hear me now? No.
Sorry, Gary, I think you're on mute.
Can you
Yeah,
hear me now?
perfect. Yes, 2 thumbs up. I can hear you well.
Hey, listen, one thing about it, Samir, of all these years, and I've been in technology 35 years, there's always something going on, right?
We talked about this being an authentic, this is the reality of life today. We are taking calls from home. Most of the time things work well, but sometimes we run into issues like these. I hope you can hear me well, and
I
our
hear you
audience can.
perfectly.
Fantastic. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
I was summarizing the journey and sort of the change in leadership expectations that has happened over time. Looking back at the last 20, 21 years, that's been fascinating to watch. I was fortunate enough that when I became a leader in the organization early on, I had good coaches who were
Mhm,
talking about these kinds of concepts back then. And
mhm,
so today, my call to action, both for myself and my peers, is let's give back to the next generation of leaders and
mhm,
guide them through the expectations and the personal growth that's needed. Because leadership is never easy. It's not designed to be easy.
mhm.
So, if you understand that, and if you know that you're going to be stretching yourself pretty much like, bench pressing increasingly more weights in your gym, that's how you get to personal growth, both in an individual capacity and also as a leader. So it's been
No, that's
fascinating
great.
to reflect. Yeah.
I have a question for you. So, we deal with startups all over the world, and I'm on, 1 to 4 panels every day, Dubai, Singapore, Indonesia, all over. And I get questions all the time about how startups can work with a company like Intel. And I just, and they ask me the question, and, I try to go down, well, go to corporate development or talk to partnerships, but is there a secret sauce in working with a large company? I mean, what do? They got a really cool technology. It's an IoT technology. It could be really beneficial to Intel. What do they do?
Yeah. Great question, Gary. And I don't know if I can tell you the sort of the secret sauce, but I have a few tips, having worked with startups mostly over the last 15 years, because the first 5 years of my career were mostly focused on engineering and managing software teams and hardware teams. The last
Mm-hmm,
15 have been on the P&L and strategy side. And I think there are two key factors that as a startup you have to keep in mind. The
mm-hmm,
first one is that what moves the needle for a startup will not necessarily move the needle for a large company, because the
mm-hmm.
large companies have tremendous revenue base. They're looking at markets and market presence in terms of billions of dollars versus a 50 to $100 million market, which is perfectly fine place for a startup to play in.
Yep.
The second important thing to understand is, and I'm sure people who work in startups this will resonate with them. A startup lives and dies by managing its cash flow,
Yep.
and bigger companies don't necessarily have the same constraint. So I think when we talk to each other, a big company and a startup, I think reflecting and adjusting for these fundamental differences goes a
Mm-hmm.
long way. Now,
I love it. I love it because I heard about it this morning. This company says, I have this great idea, but I'm running out of cash. Startup.
there you go. There you go. And that becomes especially acute in an area like cities and transportation, where
Mm-hmm,
infrastructure may take heavy investment
mm-hmm,
before it starts paying back. And
mm-hmm.
now, of course, a bit of that is changing with new models like the capex to opex conversion, and even software-defined infrastructure increasingly becoming more important. But within Intel, we obviously have the Intel Capital, which is one of the largest corporate VC firms out there, billions of dollars deployed in hundreds of companies, many with great exit and liquidity events. So that's a natural entry point. So in my capacity as the business
Intel
GM,
Capital would be one point for them, right? Okay.
correct. So that's an entry point. I think the other entry point is when you look at our product strategy, engaging with the business units to see how the value that a startup is bringing is nicely complementing what that particular business unit is doing would be a
Mm-hmm.
natural way to get, the business, someone like me interested in it and spend more time with it. And I think the third thing is, I think, set expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very aware of the fact that big companies can have processes and overheads. So I think the startups need to appreciate that. And I think the people working in bigger companies with the startups need to understand that every minute a startup CEO is spending with you is a minute they're not spending with a customer or their developer to get to
Mm-hmm.
that next big milestone and eventually some sort of a liquidity event. So I think a bit of empathy goes a long way. I think finding the right people who are empowered to partner and move this forward is an important thing. And finding alignment of strategy in the way you work would be the third thing.
How do they do it though? Like, let's say somebody says you are the person that they want to find, or some other executive with Intel. What do they do? Like, what's the process? Like, how do they get? The thing is like crossing the chasm. How do
Yeah.
they get your attention? Right? Is it because they're all over the place, or LinkedIn, or what do they do?
I think the two typical paths, as I said, would be reaching out to somebody like me or somebody on my team. And then I
Mm-hmm.
would connect them with the right vertical owner within, say, Intel Capital to say, hey,
And
could you talk to them?
excellent.
And, and the other path would be, the Intel Capital investors. There's a lot of information on the web. You can obviously go and talk to them and reach out to them. They are very eager to talk to companies that are startups and see where we can help the startup. Because keep in mind, as a corporate VC firm, this is not just a pure return on equity or return on investment play. Typically Intel Capital is also looking for how does a strategy, feed into the Intel ecosystem? How can the Intel ecosystem help them scale? Because ultimately it's all about scale.
I got it. And then, so we talked about this before, but I mean, 5G is everywhere, right? And I'm not sure people understand how important 5G is. And I've listened to some of your talks before. You talk about 5G. Can you tell the audience about how important you feel it is and how important it is in terms of democratization?
Great question, Gary. So let me sort of compare and contrast the transition from 4G to 5G to the prior transitions, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like as an ecosystem, we haven't explained the value and sort of the distinction of this latest transition well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So as you move from 2G, which was primarily your low-end feature phone, to 3G, which would be an example of that would be the first iPhone, to 4G LTE, which is what we are using today,
Mm-hmm.
the smartphone and making it a better experience for the smartphone user owner has been
Mm-hmm.
at the center of the network design, has been at the center of the technology design. So it's all
Mm-hmm.
been about, how do you ensure more coverage? How do you get the right kind of spectrum? How do you deliver enough bandwidth?
Mm-hmm.
The one key distinction in going from LTE to 5G is that it's about much more expansive set of devices than just your phone. Yeah, your phone will become better. It'll have better
Mm-hmm.
bandwidth, speed. The experiences will be better. That goes without saying.
Mm-hmm.
But really, what we were designing with 5G was, from a technology perspective, something that can accommodate a much more diverse set of devices onto this network.
Mm-hmm.
So think about, your traffic cameras in a city that have a lot of bandwidth need,
Mm-hmm.
coexisting with a set of drones, swarm drones or drones in formation that may need more real-time guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And on the same network, you have things like electric meters outside your home that may tweet your usage once a month and then go back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So this network has to be intelligent enough, and I use the word intelligent and not smart, and I'll come to that distinction in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be intelligent enough to be able to accommodate these high latency, high or low latency, high bandwidth, large number of devices, all operating at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and dynamically allocating bandwidth and meeting the quality of service expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And it had to do all that with an extremely low power consumption, because the trajectory we were on the prior transitions, if we had continued that, we would not have enough power in the world to power the next generation of 5G networks.
Wow.
So I think a lot of thought was put into how do we become energy efficient and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I take a slightly different view of 5G, I think we've got 7.6 billion people on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from a technology perspective, we've done an incredible job enabling a lot more economic activity, helping people get jobs, pull them up from poverty, and so on. But the fact is, a large part of the world population is still not connected. And connection is not just about applications and entertainment and media. Connectivity is also the on-ramp to economic opportunities. And especially in the COVID.
The on-ramp of economic, I love that. On-ramp of economic opportunities. I love it.
Because, especially in today, right? If you think about whether it's telemedicine or remote education,
right?
What was sort of an adjacent tangential use case has become mainstream so quickly. So if you don't have good connectivity at home, your kids, cannot have good education. They're not able to connect to the school. And so I think one of the things people looked at as they designed 5G was, hey, are we truly thinking about, you brought out the phrase that you used, or maybe I used it in one of our earlier conversation, democratization of access.
Yeah.
It's about really bringing the next billion, 2 billion, 3 billion people onto this network and giving them the economic opportunities. So hopefully that paints a picture of why 5G is different, why 5G will be even more impactful than the prior transitions, and how 5G is about much more than just a smartphone experience.
Oh, 5G is the glue that connects everything together.
That's a great way to put it.
I love it. I love it. So,
by the way, there's one more thing I want to say. What 5G is not is an excuse to wait. Sometimes I see a bit of a pause to say, oh, let's wait for 5G to be deployed before we do this. That's not the message here, right? We've got connectivity, get going with 4G and LTE, but ask yourself the question, once you get to this lower latency, high bandwidth, flexibility with different kind of a devices, kind of a network, how will your solution need to evolve? Where will the workloads sit and be analyzed? How will it be distributed between the edge, the intelligent network, and the cloud? And how it may change your business model? So I think it's a good impetus to have that analysis and to think about it, but it's definitely not a reason or an excuse to wait.
So I read in an article, and I also saw a presentation you did. You talked about traffic lights being dumb, and you talked about how AI needs to help a city become smarter. And I mean, just to put it in perspective, I mean, actually cities are pretty dumb for the most part, right? They're on a journey, but not all of them have taken that journey. Some have, some haven't. So how does AI help a city become smarter?
So to answer that question, let me take a step back. Gary, I don't know if you can have audience participation, but I'll ask you this question. What's your best guess of how many people are moving into cities every week, into urban areas before COVID?
Before COVID? Honestly, I mean, I don't know, 400 million. I don't know, a lot.
No, every week.
Oh, every week. I don't know how many.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I think your intuition, if you were thinking about yearly movement, was actually quite good.
Yearly.
3 million people were moving into the urban areas globally every week. That's the population of Chicago.
Wow.
So together we are creating 50 plus Chicagos worldwide. And I know because of COVID, some of the urbanization may have slowed or taken a pause, but I fundamentally believe cities will evolve post-COVID, but they will continue to be the center of some of the economic activity that's going on.
No, go ahead. No, I love it.
I was going to say, and all these citizens and the infrastructure to support them, which is primarily, to your point, not as advanced as it needs to be today, but we'll get there together. It's going to generate a tremendous amount of data. Our estimate is this year in cities, if you look at traffic cameras, public safety implementation, transportation systems, and so on and so forth, we have created about 16.5 zettabytes of data. To put that into perspective, if this is 1 gigabyte, the coffee that I'm having is equivalent to 1 gigabyte. That's enough coffee to fill up the entire Great Wall of China.
Oh my God.
It's the amount of data we would create in 36,000 hours of nonstop full high definition recording. And by the way, this is not the total amount of data. This is the new data we are layering out. And these layers are getting thicker. The amount of data that we are generating is becoming bigger.
And 16 zettabytes, right?
16 zettabytes.
Well, I was reading somewhere that said there's 23 zettabytes would be enough to go to the moon. 33 zettabytes, enough to go to the moon 33 times back and forth if you have disks stacked end to end, right? It's crazy amount of data.
Wow, that's crazy amount of data. And sometimes I think these numbers become, these are exponentially large numbers. And so we sort of get desensitized to what's coming our way, or this data tsunami we are already in the middle of. The reason I'm giving this background is to analyze this data, because data doesn't mean anything unless you analyze it, you get some sort of an insight, and you're able to take an action.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we need to think about how can AI help? Because you cannot manually just store all this data in the cloud and hope to get to it. Also, many of these use cases that are evolving are going to be real time at the edge. So if there's an accident, you want real time information on how bad was the accident. Think about what happens today. Somebody reports an accident, and without any details, a couple of ambulances, a couple of fire engines will show up. Why? Because we care for our citizens. So we assume a worst case scenario and dispatch resources, assuming that worst case scenario. The reality is, if you can have a little more intelligence and say, hey, this was a call about an accident, but it's a minor fender bender.
Right.
That may not necessarily need a couple of fire engines and 2 ambulances and so on. That it makes things really, really efficient. And the path to getting there is edge AI. You can analyze real-time camera information, and you can give a lot more detail, including live footage of what's happening at the scene. And then you can also do things like use it to control systems around it, to maybe adjust the traffic light timings, to have the traffic go away from that area, to have kiosks warn people that there's an accident ahead, to broadcast this information to drivers, which in some way is starting to happen. And I could keep building up on it. But the underlying engine for all this, to do it in an automated, autonomous way, would be the edge AI capabilities that are doing real-time analysis. And we could pick 50 such examples. And I think that's how AI will help, both on the edge by doing real-time analytics, but also in the cloud by helping us think about traffic patterns, how they vary by weather, time of the day, and therefore how should that be used to do real-time adjustment of traffic light signals, as an example.
It's interesting because, Alvin Toffler had this term infobesity. I mean, honestly, we are in that state today. It's incredible. I mean, you're talking about 16 zettabytes of data. You're talking about everything being connected. So with the startups out there that are in artificial intelligence, and I know we broadcast out to like 900,000 people now, make sure that you look at artificial intelligence and make sure that you partner with Intel. It's great. So, you talked about vision-based intelligence in one of your presentations. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, if I think about how the camera technologies have evolved, I think the first cameras were basically sensors, right? Mm-hmm. They were the equivalent of our eyes, and all the data was being sent back to the cloud to be analyzed, to get some information and hopefully insights and actions. The next stage was put a little bit of smartness next to them so that they could, for example, wake up on a trigger. If somebody's passing by, start recording, don't record otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. The third stage, which we are in the middle of, is really this level of intelligence, I call it. And for me, smart is a device that you pre-program to do certain things, and it does it really well. Mm-hmm. Intelligent device is something that learns over time and gets better at what it needs to do.
Yeah.
So it's learning from the environment around it. Now, if you apply the term intelligence to vision, really what you're talking about is putting the eyes and the brains together to more intelligently interpret and react to what's going on. Let's, since we build up on this.
I love that. I'm going to write about that. The eyes and the brains together. Okay. I just wrote an article on AI and quantum computing for Forbes, and I'm looking for lots of the eyes and the brain together. That is like so perfect because it explains what it is. I love it. That's great.
I'm glad you like the analogy.
No, that's great. I agree. And the thing is, we have so many different, with this Internet of Things and the smart city environment, I'm hearing about it all the time, all over the world. Smart cities are approaching us. Startups are approaching us. And it's not just one place. It's different than I've ever seen, right? So it could be Hong Kong, could be Singapore, could be Jakarta, could be Dubai. It's amazing. I mean, and Intel's at the right place at the right time. I mean, it's, and you are right in the cutting edge of it. So this thing with IoT. So yesterday I was on a panel, we were talking about IoT for manufacturing and 5G. We were talking about cobots. We were talking about how things are going to change. It's so, and IoT in our houses, right? The roof is leaking. Hey, it's a little bit too warm in the refrigerator. I mean, Intel's going to be everywhere, right?
Well, together with our partners, yes,
With your
that is our
partners.
hope. Yes, yes. Because keep in mind, we are still the underlying technology platform. We are still Intel Inside, except now instead of just thinking about Intel Inside a device, we are really thinking about Intel Inside the edge to the network to the cloud. So the end-to-end solution, and
Ah,
how do we optimize that?
edge to the network to the cloud. I love that. Edge to the network cloud. Fantastic. And, if we look at it from intelligent transportation standpoint, I was reading about some of the things in terms of intelligent transportation. I mean, it's like it makes no sense today when you're in a city. I mean, how coordinated are the efforts, and how much does the Internet of Things, AI, smart city, how does that play in a? Let's take a city like Chicago. How does it play?
Um, Let me take a step back first, because I think one of the things I remind myself and my team, which is primarily US focused, but we've got people in different parts of the world, is that there is a lot of learnings from based on the work that are happening in different parts of the world. And one of the roles we play is bringing those ideas together and sharing them. We recently met with the mayor of Houston and his leadership team. I sit on the advisory council for the mayor of San Jose here in the Bay Area. But one of the things I constantly emphasize is that the way different parts of the world are approaching smart cities is very different. If you look at Singapore, being a sort of having the luxury of a nation city, I call them, they're able to have a very clear tops-down data strategy and how they're going to implement it. In fact, about 3 months ago, in the middle of COVID, when people are cutting back on their budgets, they said we're going to be increasing our budgets towards digitalization by 30% because we want to use this crisis to come out stronger and more prepared for the next pandemic or challenge that a crisis that our city may face. So to now directly answer your question, one of the challenges with cities has been that a lot of the solutions that are put in place are very siloed. They don't really talk to each other. Yet when you look at the nature of infrastructure, by definition, it has to be shared. So
Yeah.
if a camera is at an intersection, a traffic intersection, yeah, it should be able to do, catch people for jumping red light or speeding. But it
Right.
should also be able to give you information about over time, real-time adjustment of green light, red light. How many times have you waited at an intersection, staring at a red light, and nobody's crossing from the other side?
How many times have you gone to a red light and you go too far and you don't hit the sensor and it doesn't change and you go backwards? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there are all these practical things that I think to solve those issues, all the technology, including the camera and some level of intelligence is there, except these systems don't talk to each other today. Now, if I look at going back to your first question about the last 20 years of the journey, eventually these systems will consolidate. A lot of these systems will be software defined, running on top of standard hardware through standard APIs. It's going to be a journey, but we will get there because we've seen that happen.
So I've heard that standard hardware and standard APIs. I've heard it that there needs to be a one universal language that they can communicate. It's not there today, correct?
Correct.
And I heard that yesterday on that, one panel we were talking about it. I agree with you. And startups, here's another opportunity for you.
So the way I like to explain it is we don't all have to build the same houses, but the way our windows and doors are designed, in other words, access inside and outside, need to be standardized.
Yeah.
Because what that does is pretty much like a set of Lego blocks that fit with each other nicely. These pieces of technology, these solutions can feed into each other. And within a certain solution, the data can be used in whatever way it's needed. But when exchanging that information, there has to be some level of standardization. And so we are spending time on interoperable standards, multiple standard bodies where, Intel is certainly represented, but a lot of our partners as well. Because ultimately, it really takes an ecosystem to do this heavy lift. No one company or a couple of companies can do it all.
How long do you think it's going to be before there's standards? Like realistic?
So the standards are an ongoing effort. And, one of the questions I get is, hey, Samir, is there a one-stop shop for smart city standards?
Right,
now,
exactly.
The reality is cities are complex with so many use cases, and it's eventually going to be benefiting every aspect of our life. So I don't think we'll get to an ideal one-stop shop, but there is some effort happening, for example, in the US at the NIST level. IEEE has efforts going on standardizing some of those things. But meanwhile, what's also happening is the underlying use cases, whether it's traffic management or public safety or monitoring air quality or managing flood water or waste management, all these use cases have respective standards to at least make sure within that specific use case, you have a seamless and interoperable set of hardware software blocks working with each other. Now the next level up is system of systems, right? How do these system of systems operate within each other harmoniously, with each other harmoniously? That's an ongoing challenge and work in progress. So I think it'll take some time.
Now, what about this? What about this? So another thing we talked about is those systems talking to each other, right? And once we start to go down to unsupervised AI, emotion AI, right on the cutting edge, and they start to communicate on what should be done, right? It's not just reporting, it's about what to do. So if traffic flow needs to be changed, then the lights start to change to be able to move the traffic in another direction. But it's incredible in terms of, predicting and then doing, right? Predicting and then actually making that type of an effort. When is that going to be? What do you think in terms of a super smart city, an intelligent city, not smart, but intelligent city, right?
Yeah. I think we're talking about a few years before we see, to borrow your phrase, a super smart city. But here is a perfect example of why we don't need to wait, right? Because when I set out a milestone like that, everybody can sit back and say, yeah, that's what we are aiming for. The reality is there is an evolution going on. Every year we are making more progress. So in case of, again, to pick up this theme of traffic intersection, because we picked up an example, let's build up on it, right? A typical traffic intersection in the US is reprogrammed once every 7 years.
7 years?
Every 7 years.
That's insane.
Now think about the community you live in and how it has changed. Having people move in, people buy cars, demographics change,
right.
And therefore how your traffic intersection problem statement has changed. But that fine tuning is just, that data has not been available. So I think the evolutionary step can we reprogram it every 6 to 12 months, which is a more appropriate cadence for these updates, and do it over the years. So somebody doesn't have to manually go in. The final state will be what you described, which is, hey, I'm analyzing the level of depth of traffic backup, and I'm combining that with the information at the aggregate city level to both optimize, or in mathematical terms, find a local maxima as well as a global maxima, right? Optimize it just on that intersection, but also optimize it at the city level. And now imagine that process being automated and doing it, factoring in the historical data, but also the real-time analytics. That'll take them some time, but we don't have to wait. We should be able to use batch analytics today. I'll give you a perfect example. We work with the city of Portland in Oregon to instrument some of the deadliest intersections based on historical data, where there were maximum pedestrian vehicular accidents. Gary, are you able to hear me?
Yeah. You went out for a second. I was like,
hey,
it's one of those
interruptions.
Stuff happens, if you know what I mean.
The fun and joy of working from. Okay,
I'm
folks.
still here. I'm waiting for you.
My apologies to you and your audience, but this is sort of the world we live in today. Doing the best we can with the upgraded connectivity that we all have at home.
Samir, I just got to tell you, a guy at your level, general manager Intel, I'm honored to have you on the show. I mean, and a year ago, we were so busy in our lives, we didn't have a chance to really, give something back. And one of the reasons that I do this show is to, broadcast out and give something back to people all over the world. because, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? And to bring some hope and happiness and knowledge to them. And so, whatever happens in terms of some of the little technical things, that's okay. We're here, we're healthy, and we're moving forward in our life. And really, that's what it's all about, isn't it?
That's a great way to put everything into perspective, Gary. I really appreciate you saying that, and being patient with, with some of the issues. But
no problem at all. Yeah. Listen, I wanted to just wrap it up in terms of where we are. I know you're really busy with your schedule, and again, I'm honored to have you on. So, if you look at the next 5 years, what do you think is going to happen in terms of smart cities, and then how the Internet of Things going to play? And if you could give us a little insight on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'll answer this from a couple of perspectives, right? The first one is the technology perspective, but technology is only part of the solution, right? It's part of the puzzle, right? The right technology solutions have to be combined with sort of stakeholder citizen involvement, the right policy, the right leadership at the city's level. And there's a lot of good stuff, as I said earlier, happening in different parts of the world that we can bring together as a set of learnings and say, what is applicable? Not everything will be, right? Even in the US, if you look at New York and San Francisco, very different demographics, very different state of infrastructure, very different businesses sort of, and why people come into the city, right? Very different reasons as well. So we have to be sort of hyper customizing the solutions to the needs of the city, yet find enough global teams to find scale, because scale is what's going to drive down the cost and increase the adoption and that whole virtuous cycle. So I think from a technology perspective, I think you will see a lot more digitization of infrastructure, I call it. People are going to start thinking about infrastructure, not just in physical terms, but in digital terms, so that it's more adaptable. I think there'll be a lot more edge intelligence. I think there will be a lot more insertion of sensors, for example, sensors that are monitoring the health of a bridge or the traffic intersection signal that'll be incorporated. I think COVID has reset expectations around how critical services should be run, how the city should be resilient. I think you'll see a lot more focus on that. And I think from a technology perspective, this interplay of data, AI at the edge, intelligent network, and continued growth in cloud will feed into each other synergistically, right? Because it's not about just one of these vectors. So I think that's sort of the picture. I think you'll see a lot more new use cases.
And you know what, Samir, what I'm hearing is data, data, data.
Exactly.
Lots and lots of data, right?
Data's insights and actions. I think to me that's sort of the
actions, right? I agree. Yeah. So I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I'd like to thank the entire Intel team for helping with this, Miriam and your entire team. I'd also like to thank my GSD team for doing a great job. And our company is GSD. We help globalize companies. We take them to the rest of the world. We really appreciate your time. I love Intel. I have forever.
Thank you.
I've been in technology over 35 years. So you guys are doing a great job, and anything we can do on our side to be able to help, we're here. Thanks for joining the show, and have a great day. And
thank you, Gary.
Thanks to you.
Yes, and it was an honor to be here. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Take care of yourself, Samir.
Bye.